Thanks for joining this episode of Black Minds Matter. My name is Denisha Merriweather, and today I am joined by the Kevin Chavous. I've known Kevin since probably high school, middle school. It's been a while, and I'll tell that funny story later about this time we were talking and you blew my mind. But Kevin Chavous has been in the trenches for education reform for a while, and all of his work has been centered around giving parents and students more education options, from attorney to DC politician, to what was next? DC politician,
Bail, Defer.
Yeah, you've done it all, and now Kevin is at K12 Inc, which is an online education platform for students all across. It's worldwide, right?
Yeah, all over the world.
Yeah,
in the U.S.
And so, Kevin, I'm really excited to have you on. So let's jump right in.
Well, let me tell you, first of all, you are not as excited as I am to be with you, Tanisha. I remember you very well when you were a young whippersnapper, as the old folks say, and you have blossomed into this beautiful flower who's a great voice for families and children in need. I'm so proud of you. I can't state or express how happy I am to have you in the trenches fighting for parents and families. So, I know you're going to interview me, but I'm here to honor you, and I appreciate all you're doing for kids.
Oh, thank you, Kevin. You're too generous. Too generous.
You're the best.
So tell me, just back it up for me a little bit and tell me about your how did you get involved in the education space? You started out as an attorney, and how did that come to be?
Well, I can tell you, Denisha, and I've shared this story with many people, so I'll give you the abbreviated version, is that when I was a young lawyer and I decided to run for the DC City Council, like you, I was always a cause guy. I wanted to change the world. I wasn't quite sure how, but I thought that public service was a good way to do it. So I ended up running for office, winning and representing Ward 7, great citizens of Ward 7 in Southeast and Northeast DC. And then I was an athlete, played basketball, and I used to have these celebrity basketball games. I mean, I played people like Brian McKnight would put a team together, or local DJs, or local radio personalities like Donnie Simpson or Big Tigger. I play all these folks, and then I got a call from our local prison, and the inmates there, the warden said, "The inmates have a team here, councilman, can you play?" So I took my team into the prison, guys who were, for major crimes and all that. And we played, and I got to know some of the young men, and I realized that some were there because of the disparate sentencing because of crack. They, be caught with possession and get life in prison or something. And I said, wow, some of these guys, but for accident of birth. And I asked them about their school. All school didn't do anything for me. I mean, I realized 85% of them couldn't read. They were dropouts. I asked the warden about it. I said, these young men have potential. What kind of education programs you have? And they said, oh, councilman, we wouldn't waste taxpayers' money. Most of them can't read, and there's no sense in wasting money on trying to educate them. And I'm going to tell you, Denisha, that changed my life, because I said, this just ain't right. So I started visiting schools in my ward. We had some great schools. We had some terrible schools. And I became a student of education, what works, what doesn't work. And at that time, we were considering charter school legislation in DC. I fought for and became chairman of the education committee, became an advocate for charter schools. But I believe let's lift all boats. So I gave DC public schools more money than they asked for, pushed our charter school movement. And after a few years, I could see that choice mattered, and that really led me to being an advocate for parents and having greater options. And then I guess shortly after that, as I helped to shepherd the charter movement in DC, I got to meet folks like, Howard Fuller and, Jeb Bush and and I just got a broad-based perspective on what education could look and feel like when you empower families. And I guess the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah, and I grew up in, for those folks listening, you guys probably already heard my story. I grew up in low income area, and most of the majority men, but women alike, the next step if they didn't graduate from high school was prison. And that school to prison pipeline is a really understatement, because that's something that I've definitely seen in my life and in the lives of my community members, and how K-12 education reform can directly impact the school to prison pipeline and give these kids different options instead of vice. And so you mentioned the piece of legislation that was groundbreaking in DC, which included the DC Opportunity Scholarship, which was for private schools, the charter school creation and expansion program, and then extra funding for public schools. Why was it important to include all three sectors in that piece of legislation?
Great question. Mayor Tony Williams, and I ran against Tony Williams for mayor. He beat me in a very hotly contested race. We were like cats and dogs. What brought us together was our commitment to DC public schools and quality choice options for families. And when Howard Fuller brought me and Tony Williams in to see Rod Page, so you had four African American men sitting in the Secretary of Education's office talking about how we could expand choice options for residents of the District of Columbia. And that's when we came up with the agreement that we would support the DC Opportunity Scholarship. And the belief was that we would be lifting all boats, that for those families that like charter schools, the feds would enter into this creative relationship to provide more money for charter school infrastructure. For those families that wanted to go to their neighborhood DC public school, it was more money for DC public schools. And over the last 15 years since the program's been in place, DC public schools has probably gotten almost twice as much as the other sectors. And then there was money set aside for scholarships for low-income kids to go to schools like Sidwell Friends or Gonzaga. If you know DC, Archbishop Carroll, private schools for kids who come from families with a combined family income of DC of under $25,000 a year. Now think about it. They're making $25,000 a year. They live in DC, one of the most expensive places in the country, and they can go to school with, some of the more expensive and highly regarded private schools in the city. And lo and behold, after 15 years, 10,000 kids have gone through the program. 90% over 90% graduation rate, 90% college going rate, and it has lifted all boats. So to answer your question, my view was that the essence of choice at its core is giving families quality options. And what better way to do that than provide access to all the quality option sectors in the nation's capital? I'm proud of the program, and yet we've had more work to do.
As a former DC transient person, everybody who comes in DC tarries for a little bit, then leaves. Actually, you've been DC forever and ever. I love the city. I want to come back maybe one of these days.
You're going to come back. In fact, you're going to come back to DC, but you're going to make a stop in Hollywood. See, I know. I saw how you roll among the celebs. When we did the Champions for Choice, Layla Ali, she asked about you. How is that young lady? What was her name? Denise.
Oh.
I mean, they love you. Layla Ali, Regina King. I mean, I said, I ain't got to say a word. I'm just going to put Denise up there. You need to be on TV. They saw that glow and that star in you.
Kevin, that was super fun. And I like that whole Champions for Choice movement that you led and brought to the world, because we think about school choice and we just think, oh, it's these little policy wonk people or all these billionaires who are supporting it. It's like, no, this impacts the everyday person. And that includes people who have name recognition. That was super cool. I really loved it. And I flew from the Dominican Republic to be there. And I think during my speech, I like had a fake Spanish accent because my brain was like doing the transition. Like, no, you're not there. Stop speaking in Spanish. This is English time. That was so fun.
Denisha, what was cool about that was it started when I met Jalen Rose, and he was going to start a charter school in Detroit, and someone put us together. And then, I got to meet people like Chris Broussard and Shaq, and even people like Kathy Lee Gifford, who was interested in some education philanthropy, and Vivica Fox and Layla Ali. And of course, Lisa Leslie was one of the main leaders, the late director Penny Marshall. And I realized in talking to folks, I remember having a conversation with Ludacris, and he said,
I remember having a conversation with Ludacris.
he said, you need to understand, we come from these neighborhoods. Most of us were able to get out because we had some talent, but he said some of the schools work, but a lot of them don't work, and it's like no one cares. And for a lot of these celebrities out there, these African American and Latino celebrities, and even some white celebrities that come from challenged backgrounds, they feel like they maybe broke out, but there's some latent sort of guilt or feeling like, what can I do to help bring more? And that's why you see a lot of them. I mean, I remember talking to the folks from LeBron James's foundation and talked to Magic about his work. And they're yearning to help. And I think that understanding, but they don't want to be in a position where they're used and all that. But by the same token, understanding that the work they do, and particularly Champs of Choice, would lead to individual children like you, Denisha, getting to go to a quality school tomorrow. It's not some piece of legislation or whatever. It's just like you can actually make a difference by impacting, tens or hundreds or thousands of kids' lives. I mean, it's a powerful thing. So I'm glad that we did that. It's helped to sensitize a whole level of people that otherwise wouldn't be sensitive to the issue. And now we just got to make sure that we use what you're doing in the Voices for Choice and eventually bring all of that together to do a major, major national campaign around the power and promise of parent choice.
Yeah, I mean, even today you see where Sierra and Russell Wilson are opening a charter school, and like you mentioned, LeBron James.
I talked to LeBron. I knew, I said to LeBron's people, I said, look, how are y'all going to do all that in a public school with no autonomy? In charter school, you could have autonomy, you can hire and fire. LeBron's people said, well, we're going to use our name. We're going to do it the right way. Yeah. And I said, okay, facts. And that's what they did. And they're running a good school.
Now, do you find, because I thought that ploy, not to tarry on that, but to kind of transition into politics, because I felt that situation with the LeBron James school and how it's kind of a charter school, but it's a traditional district school, very confusing. But I thought they did that because of the politics that surround this issue. And so what you are DC Dive, you've been engaged in politics and have worked in this game for a long time, especially in this time of 2020. What's your hope, or what do you think some challenges are also around school reform?
Well, you've heard me say this before, Denisha. I was one of the first ones to say it, that there's no Republican or Democratic way to teach a kid how to read, write, count, or compete. And I do think that the politics of education has had a stranglehold on our ability to ensure that every child has equal access to a quality education. The politics of education, to me, is not grounded in what's best for children all the time. Oftentimes, it's grounded in adult interests. So when I talk to, I've had dinner with, Black caucuses in South Carolina and Alabama, Louisiana over the years. I've met with Republican legislators, in Texas and Alaska. I've probably been to, nearly 50 states talking about this issue. And when I engaged them and talked to them about it, I said, there's the one issue that I know of that we should clearly depoliticize is the education of our young. And so the barometer I use, which I suggest to other politicians or policymakers to use, is to ask yourself a question when you're considering a piece of legislation or a proposal that impacts on education. Will this help a child or group of children learn? If the answer is yes, the barometer I use is I support it. If it's no, I'm against it. So what does that mean? That means that I take the label and the political, caucus's view off the table. So if it's a scholarship program that Dems don't like, but I know that 500 kids or 1,000 kids will go to a school that meets their needs and their parents choose, I will support it. If it's a magnet program in a public school that, the school district superintendent wants to do it, only 20 kids benefit from it, but it's a program that otherwise those 20 kids wouldn't get that benefit, I'm going to support it. And I think this whole idea of us putting the party politic or waiting for, the caucus or the party or my political mentor to tell me how to think and behave or what to support when it comes to education policy, I think we're doing our citizens a disservice. And I would like to think, Denisha, the last thing I say on this, it looks like we'll have a divided federal government and we'll continue to have a divided legislature. Right now, because of 2020, the most transformative, tumultuous year in my lifetime, this in probably 1968, when I was very young. But in the midst of this crazy year, we are in an either or world where either you're with me or you're against me, left, right, I'm gonna troll you. And I think this is an issue where we need to bring people together and figure out what's best for children and try as best we can to take the politics out of it. Now, that means that we need to extend ourselves beyond ourselves and find ways to coalesce to help children. And I think this is a huge opportunity. I think we can get more done when it comes to education and parent choice in a divided government world than we could otherwise, because I think that this is a time when people should be engaged in being and understand they're now have to be forced to build coalitions. What better coalition than Coalition for Children? And that's what I think we have the opportunity to engage in even during this time.
Yeah, one thing, it's not appropriate to say, oh, one of the great things that happened during this time, but one of the silver lining things that happened in the midst of COVID-19 is that people are more engaged with the education of their kids. People are now looking to the schools and they're asking more questions, and that's like a great starting point. Absolutely. It's like, just ask more questions and figure out why things are the way they are. And that's such a great doorway into education reform and pushing the system. I was talking with a friend the other day and she was like, yeah, a lot of my suburban mom friends was saying how they were so appalled how they weren't able to get all of these policies and things changed within the traditional system that they thought they would be able, just because of their voice. Like just to say that some things need to be fixed, and the eyes of a lot of people are open that maybe some things are not working as awesomely as I thought they were.
Well, and I think you're right. And I think that one byproduct or impact that this year of 2020 will have, we will have the biggest explosion of parent choice in our history. And you know why? Because more and more parents, as you said, Denisha, are going to be forced to be educated consumers about education. They're forced to really understand, well, what's Johnny, Jane, Jose, Jamal really looking at, and getting in terms of their classroom work. How come this teacher is more responsive when I reach out and send them an email as opposed to this other teacher? And I think that's a good thing. And, the work I'm doing now, where we run, my company, K12, we run the largest online education platform in the country. And more families are coming to us as a result. And what we have found is that parents now, even over the last 6 months, are asking more questions. Do you have the email to what would be my kid's fifth grade teacher? We weren't getting a bunch of those kind of questions before. Most people were running from something because we had a lot of kids who were bullied, kids with medical challenges, physical challenges, kids who were behind 2 or 3 grades. But now we're getting a mix of all kinds of parents. And because of the experience of now they have to take ownership and be involved more in their kids' education, they're now more educated about what questions to ask the educators. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
You wrote an article recently. We've always applauded teachers for the amazing job they do, but this year they deserve a standing ovation. And in there, you talk about preparing teachers, how during this time we found that teachers are not as prepared for the online environment, the online world, as in for other things that we thought they were.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And look, first of all, I gotta say, see, that's why I love you, Denise. You're so tight. You be reading my stuff and asking questions. I mean, you just on your game all the time. Do your homework. And I just love the fact that you are up with the work that you're involved in. But you're right. We found that many school districts who weren't prepared for this, teachers would just do a PDF, send it to families and say, okay, study this, we'll talk next week. But those who were engaged, they actually, tried to make sure that they created a meaningful experience for children online. They figured out ways to group kids according to proficiency levels with Class Connect sessions that we use now. They had meaningful back and forth in terms of working with parents and helping parents. And what happens, those great teachers out there are so used to adapting that they do what I just applauded you for doing, Tanisha. They did their homework and they sought ways to better themselves. And I think that, we need to give those teachers standing ovation, but we also need to help coach up those teachers who need to be coached up. And frankly, those teachers that really don't want to or feel like, because some teachers say, well, I don't want to make the adjustment, this is a new way, then that's fine. I mean, by putting kids' interests first, that should be the barometer. And I'm telling you, I am a big supporter of teachers in every way possible. And I think those teachers, the teachers that I think we need today in this new world, we need, like when you went to the Dominican Republic, we need teachers who are cause-oriented, not job-focused. And when I say cause-oriented, then, like those kids in the old Peace Corps day that, straight out of college, go to some hut in Bangladesh or Nicaragua, feed hungry babies 20 hours a day, sleep 3 hours a night, wake up smiling and do the same thing over again. I think the teaching profession historically has been an avocation of people like that. We need more of that with this next generation of students.
Yeah. And for all the folks listening, I would definitely say to tune into that last piece with the teachers, because Kevin is a part of K12, which is, so you are one of the experts. I mean, I think you are probably the expert in this space because you work.
Come on, bring it home now.
Expert, because you work and operate in, this is your world, to operate in a fully online virtual space and making it effective and impactful for families, and not just, oh, we're online now. You've been doing this for a long time. And so and also, so I want to back up, because before we were talking a little bit about politics.
Yeah.
And so I want you to talk about D first, so the Democrats for Education Reform. And I want you to talk about Bayo, because those are two different organizations that you helped to found, but they kind of merged together when you think about the missions at the
Yeah,
end.
they did. When I left office 15 years ago, I had gotten beaten up so bad for being a Democrat that supported charter schools. But there are a handful of us out there that were supportive. Dwight Evans in Philadelphia. There was Cory Booker. There were a number of us who were supportive of choice, but it was rough. And so I said, and the one thing they would say is, "Oh, you're a closet Republican, or you're anti public schools." And I said, "Look, my record is clear. I supported DC public schools immeasurably, but more than that, I'm supporting what's best for kids." And I said, we need an organization that's started by Democrats. The board needs to be Democrats, and the funders need to be Democrats. So, I got people like Andy Rotherham. I got, a number of folks like Caprice Young, and a number of Democrats I knew, and we started DFER, Democrats for Education Reform. We found some people to partner with us, some hedge fund guys and people with resources, funded it. And the mission was that we would push our party toward being open to student-centered politics. And DFER now, Shavar Jeffries is running DFER, and they have chapters all over the country, and they support political candidates, Democrats, who are open to education reform. And that was the thing. We wanted to make sure that we took away the label of being closet Republicans in a highly charged political environment. And it was a powerful thing we did. BAYO was founded by Howard Fuller and Virginia Walden Ford. There were several folks who were involved and when I met Howard, BAYO, the Black Alliance for Educational Options, were Black folks, mainly Black African-American educators who supported parent choice in all forms, including scholarships and vouchers. And it was a powerful group, and they worked with not just elected officials, but Black educators, and particularly Black charter school operators who often didn't have access to the large foundation dollars. And a lot of mom and pops who had neighborhood schools, who had amazing teachers. BAYO provided support for those operators. And they also, most importantly, provide support and information for parents who were trying to exercise options in the chapters where BAYO is located. And in many ways, those groups did come together when I was on the BAYO board and former chairman of BAYO after Howard. And I was chairman of DFER after founding it. And we worked together to empower families and make sure families knew who their positive voices of leadership were in their communities. I think that now we're in the next iteration. That's why I'm so proud of the Voices for Choice that you're a part of, because I've always believed, Tanisha, that at the end of the day, it is the end user's voice that's most important. Now I know in DC, we have 10,000 students who got scholarships to go to private schools based on the program that I helped to start. And now with the Florida Opportunity Scholarship, you got well over 100,000 students every year going through the program. And these students like you have gone on to graduate from college, get advanced degrees, have great jobs. Your voices need to be heard in every hill, hamlet, state legislature in the country. And that's really what I think the next level of activism is in education reform. For those of us who came from the legislative world or even the educated world, I mean, that was important at that time. But we need to empower more voices of the beneficiaries of these programs, because your voices matter. Like Black minds matter. Your minds matter. Your voices matter in making sure you positively infect this new crop of legislators on both sides of the aisle, and particularly the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. They need to know that you are out there so they understand what school choice really means.
Yeah, there is Kevin, you're giving me a lot of great spaces to talk about your works, because you wrote a book called Voices for Choice, right? and highlighting student stories. And that was way before the Voices for Choice initiative got launched.
I featured 10 young people around the country, Voices of Determination. And it was all kids who came from a great school experience, but they were determined in their education, and they all had challenges. And I interviewed every kid, heart-wrenching stories, and I'm so proud of those young people. It moves me to know that the power and resiliency of our children can overcome anything if they have someone who exhibits some belief in what they can do and what their potential is. And I just believe that, the educated elite, the policymakers, I mean, all do great work. But at the end of the day, we need to empower voices like yours. And that's why I'm a big believer in what you are doing.
Yeah. It is very remarkable when you think about this year, the scholarship program that I took advantage of in Florida, the Step Up for Students Scholarship, gave out 1 million. It's hit its 1 million mark. So it gave out 1 million scholarships to date. And that's 1 million beneficiaries, how you said, who benefited from a choice option. And you think about that million, they're going out and they're going to be voting. They're going to be sending their kids. They now have a new mindset on education because they've been impacted by education freedom. And so that multitude, and it's way more than that across the country. And so that's remarkable stride.
Each one teach one. I mean, you build a foundation by putting in the first brick. And now just think about that program that John Kirtley and Jeb Bush and others are responsible for. I mean, it started with 1 brick and now 1 million bricks. And seeing people like you, there's so many flowers that flow from those seeds that have been planted. And, I feel the same way. I mean, at K12, we've educated 1 million kids. The DC Opportunity Scholarship, 10,000. Every year, folks like Eagle Moskowitz educates, 15, 20,000, 30,000. You think about, the 5 million kids in charter schools. And for many of those families, this, Tanisha, I've had parents whose kids have gone to choice option schools who said to me, I went back to get my GED because I saw how excited my kid was about school. I was never excited about school. I mean, this idea of having a broad-based view of what's possible, that's all that America should be about. And so I think, I celebrate what you're doing, but there's more work to be done, and you're at the center of it. So anyway, I'm just excited to be with you. Now, by the way, speaking of books, I'm so glad that you like my other side of writing.
Well, that's what I was just about to, because so just a background. So I am a conspiracy theorist. Anyone who knows me, like, it doesn't matter if it's like, oh, there was a dinosaur that lived on Mars once upon a time. I'm gonna be like, really? I believe that. I could see it. So Kevin has this series, Jackson Lowry. And so I've read the series, and the first book is based on education, which had me like texting Kevin, like when I saw him, he never would answer my question. If there was some truth behind The Plan by Kevin Chavous.
Well,
I'm hoping I could put you on the spot and have you to answer my question.
Well, in fairness, for those people who are out there, now I've written several books, but like Tanisha, I love a good thriller. I love a good conspiracy. I grew up reading that stuff. And let me tell you, Tanisha, you probably won't know this, but you remember like the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew? I was reading that stuff when I was a little kid, so I always believed it, and I always enjoyed that stuff. And then I said, you know what? I want to write a thriller conspiracy. And I always like these storylines where an average person sort of, moseying along, enjoying their day, and all of a sudden they get swept into something and they're on the run. That sort of was the theme. But The Plan, which was the first one, it really, if you're a DC person, then you have heard about the plan. And the plan really was based on this idea that the gentrifiers were going to kick the indigenous Black folks in DC out. So I took sort of that concept of the plan and layered on this sort of white supremacy context. And, it's funny because, when my wife reads my stuff, she said, wow, this is what goes on in your head, and I'm like, yeah.
So tell them, give everyone a summary of the book. So it's the school lunches.
And I don't want to go too far, but the plot is that they want to sort of help purge as many, young Black and brown babies as possible as part of this purification effort. And there's a guy who is a lawyer who's had some challenges personally and in a rut, if you will, who gets swept up in this. And there's some politicians involved and likely president and all this stuff, and he ends up helping to save the day. I enjoyed the heck out of it. And there's been a couple books since. It was the trilogy, and I already have the outline for number 4. I decided I'm going to do it again. And since my favorite reader out there, Denisha, when are you going to do the next one? Well, I'm going to do it. It's become a little cult book. I got a little group of folks who, reach out to me and give me suggestions about where to take Jackson and his team. So it's a lot of fun.
But Kevin, you didn't tell me if there was a little bit of truth behind that book.
I will say that there are parts of truth to that. In fact, every storyteller mixes in some truth to their great stories. And there is some truth to it, not the key conspiracy part of it, but some of the characters. In fact, I modeled, if you remember Ronnie, Jackson's best friend or his ex-wife's cousin, who's a military guy, he's modeled after a guy I know to a T. Everything about him, even in terms of this underground bunker he has, is something that's exactly what he does. And in fact, when I told him I'd written a book model, he said, "You didn't use my name, did you?" He was like, "I don't want no one to know." That's okay. I didn't use your name.
Oh, Kevin, it's so awesome. We talked about, I talked about your book series on a different podcast that we had when we were talking about contracts and who's paying for the toilet paper. So all the listeners, go back and watch that episode. You can also listen to it on the podcast. And so we were talking about contracts, government contracts. And I was like, oh my God, you better pay attention.
You better pay attention. You better pay attention. Lock your doors at night. I'm just saying.
Well, thank you so much. That was, I would definitely recommend it to anybody. It's so awesome. And last question, why do Black minds matter?
Black minds matter so much. We're at a time where human life, frankly, human minds are devalued because people base their judgments on the value of individuals based on their political beliefs. And that fundamentally is flawed. The key thing we should be focused on is each individual matters, each life matters, and indeed each mind matters. And as we're in this period of time during 2020, when we have Black Lives Matter and people are talking about the fact that you want to be treated like everyone else, the best way to go to the next level of understanding and appreciation for the value of Black lives is to maximize the potential of Black minds. And that's why this effort that Denisha and the folks at AFC have put together is so, so very important. We want to create a cadre, a horde, a legion of educated African-American babies who become men and women who are productive and contributors to the discussions of the day, their day, now and in the future. Black minds matter because a Black mind is a terrible thing to waste. It is something that is part of the centerpiece of American values and American prosperity. And Denisha, I tell you right now, I'm so proud of what you're doing. I'm so proud of what all the voices of choice are doing when they stand up and say that their education mattered to them because it allowed them to be productive members of society. So I'm more honored to be with you than a lot of the programs I'm on, and I look forward to working for you one day. I told you that. Make sure you hold a job for me because one day I want to just be following you and supporting your efforts.
Thank you so much, Kevin.